Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Wednesday, June 5th, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday. And talking about long, slow glides, you should be looking at the American stock market right now. Actually, not just the American market, the whole global market's taking a clubbing, huge amount of volume out there on the Dow. I think the final sell-off has begun, and investors are realizing this bubble has peaked, and now they're all thinking of maybe now's the time to be getting out. And if I actually had money to invest in the stock market, I would definitely be pulling out right about now. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, managing the Truth Warp Drive, ready to answer the phone when you call on in with your concerns and particular perspectives on what's going on here. Over in Turkey, the protests are continuing. The protesters have rejected the government apology, and they're continuing their demonstrations, and the Turkish government, of course, is continuing the abuse. They're escalating it. We're seeing all this tear gas and chemical weapons being deployed against these protesters. A lot of these canisters are being photographed and put out on the social media around the world, and a lot of them are marked, made in the USA. And so the protesters have basically reached the point where they're saying the agenda now is for the complete resignation of the Erdogan government. They want the government gone. So it's blossomed way beyond that park that was going to be bulldozed for a shopping center being built by Erdogan's son-in-law. And now it's just the entire nation has stood up and said, okay, we've had it. It is a repeat of Romania, which began with a riot at a sporting event, became a spontaneous political rally, spread across the country. 2 weeks later, Ceausescu was machine-gunned to death on Romanian national television. Commenting again, Turkish trade unions continue to join the protests against Erdogan. And this, of course, is going to be a major, major problem for the U.S. and Israel agenda in Syria. They were counting on having that northern front to be able to project power into Syria from all sides. This whole policy of encirclement and cutting them off and laying siege to an entire country. And if Erdogan's government falls, that, of course, is going to be a major problem. And I don't expect either the United States or Israel to back off the agenda. What the troubles in Turkey may do is force the hand of either the United States or Israel, probably Israel, and say, let's just go for it now. So we need to keep our eyes open over there. Erdogan is ramping up his attacks against the use of social media. They have arrested 25 Twitter users that they were able to identify as major sources of tweets going out to spread the word about the protests. And they've started arresting them. They've arrested 25 at least. They're looking for others. And all this is really going to do is encourage other Turkish protesters to use Twitter just 1 or 2 times so that there isn't the appearance of any kind of a central organizer. And again, everything Erdogan doing is just going to inflame the anger that much more. In response to the attack on social media and the Twitter users, apparently the Turkish government networks got hacked, including the Prime Minister's official website, and they gained access to staff email addresses, passwords, phone numbers that they're just releasing out there. So this attack on social media has backflashed already. There is one photo that has come out of the protests that seems to be capturing the public imagination, and it's this Turkish woman dressed in a red dress, and she doesn't look like she's a protester. She's just standing there in her dress with her little bag over her arm, and she's just being hosed down with pepper spray by this, masked police officer. He's just, spray her, and this indiscriminate applying a pepper spray and tear gas is only going to make matters worse. We're going to be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the protests continuing over in Turkey. We're talking about this photograph that is rapidly becoming an icon of what's going over there in Turkey, where this armored, hooded, protected police officer in a crouching position is using a hose to just spray gallons of pepper spray on this woman who's standing there with a red dress and a white purse, and she doesn't have a sign, She doesn't look like a protester. And I saw that, and the first thing it reminded me of is one of the photos that came out of the crackdown on the Occupy protests, where the cop was just spraying this woman full in the face, and it was that became an iconic photo. Now, there's an interesting article that came out over in Information Clearinghouse, and the headline was, "People have killed their fear of authority and the protests are growing." And it's talking about how everybody is just improvising all these little devices to disable these armored vehicles, little paint bombs against their viewing ports and their turrets, you know, $5,000 electronic viewing scope and 50 cents worth of paint, and you can completely disable it. But the part I had an issue with was people have killed their fear of authority. And what's actually happening is far more profound, and we've talked about this before on this show. Your brain operates on these neurotransmitters. These are specific chemicals that carry the messages around the brain. The brain is not really an electronic computer-like system. The messages are transmitted with these neurotransmitters. And if you use up those neurotransmitters, that message cannot be felt. Now, fear is tiring. Fear is exhausting. And when you have a government that is using fear constantly to control the people, it's only so long that that will work until the brain uses up all those neurotransmitters that signal fear and the body cannot replace them fast enough. And at that point, it's not a matter of people becoming courageous and people overcoming their fear. They're simply exhausted and unable to feel fear any longer. And when you reach that point where the fear is exhausted, all that is left is rage. And that's when situations like Romania and Turkey and Egypt and potentially America start to happen. We're going to grab a quick phone call here. Dave in Oklahoma. Aloha, Dave. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, well, not quite as heavy as where you're at right now, but I was just curious about source information on your article yesterday about nicotine and its effect on Parkinson's and Alzheimer's.
I'll tell you what, I had to actually hunt that down for somebody yesterday, and what I'll do is I'll hunt it down and post it. It wasn't actually posted to the website. It was just a comment that came up because I'd come across this information, and it's purely from a statistical study of...
I agree.
Yeah, it's a statistical study, but I do have that source because I had to print it out for somebody about a week ago. I'll hunt that down and post it to whatreallyhappened.com after today's radio show, okay?
Mike, thank you so much.
All right.
And enjoying your show. Keep it up, man.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. Now, getting back on to Turkey. Over in Israel, they're expressing concern that there might be a military coup in Turkey because the military does not like Erdogan at all. We're already seeing some of the military coming out to aid the protesters. They're not actively joining in the protest, but they're going out there, they're helping the paramedics, they're handing out gas masks. It's a secondary level of support, but it does provide a bellwether for what the rank-and-file Turkish military feel about Erdogan's rule. And there could be a military coup, or it could simply bring down the government and replace it with another one. Could be another model like Egypt, where the military took control for a while, then ceded to a new civilian government. And it's a very real possibility there. And again, for the U.S. and Israel's geopolitical interests in the region, it's going to be a serious, serious derailment of this agenda to encircle and attack Syria as the final stepping stone to the long drooled-over war with Iran. Now, meanwhile, up in Frankfurt, they're still reeling from the effects of this last weekend's protests against the European Central Bank. They're calling it the Blockupy movement. And they're angry over austerity. They're angry over the fact that private central banks do not serve the people and the nation. They serve themselves. They're angry over the fact that it's a predatory system that is designed to plunge the people and the nation into debt in order to control them. They're tired of austerity. They're tired of debt slavery. They're tired of Ponzi scheme banking set up by people who become insanely rich when the banks start to operate and then dump all the accumulated losses and debt and destruction onto future generations. And these protesters in Frankfurt have the right target, because all that we are seeing, both in Europe and the United States, goes all the way back to the predacious behavior of private central banks issuing all of the public currency as a loan at interest. And that is really the target for the protests and the anger. That's why they were so scared about the Occupy movement. The Occupy movement wasn't focused on the government. They were focused on the banking itself, the system of banking. Over in Cambodia, protests over there regarding apparently some strikers against the Nike factory were arrested. And that has triggered a wider protest and anger over there. And we seem to be getting into this situation where all of this repression all over the globe has reached the point where repression simply breeds or creates more anger, more rage. And like I said, when a government is using fear to control its people, there's a limited lifespan on how long you can get away with that until the fear literally burns itself out. And all that's left is the rage here. Now, getting on to Pentagate, Octagate, Heptagate. The IRS, of course, is still in the forefront of the media scandals. And it's very interesting hearing some of the comments that have been coming out of these hearings. We're going to be talking about that in a little bit here. But the idea that there was a political bias at work in the targeting of these nonprofit groups is made very evident over the fact that these conservative groups were being targeted and harassed. And meanwhile, the Washington-based Council on American Islamic Relations got their tax-exempt status reinstated. They're connected to the Democrats. And apparently their paperwork was not in order, but they were reinstated anyway. Why did they get this special treatment? Well, because the Council on American Islamic Relations got out the Muslim vote for Barack Obama. And apparently 85% of Muslim Americans voted for Obama, partly through the efforts of the Council on American Islamic Relations, so they get their tax-exempt status. So there's a very, very clear political bias here. More scandals from the Internal Revenue Service. The auditors are continuing to out the excessive, lavish spending these tax collectors are enjoying. They're living high on the hog, and it's your hog. Apparently, one of the other stories that has come out is in a 2010 conference in Anaheim, California. One of the IRS officials stayed 5 nights in a room that normally goes for $3,500 a night. Another one got a room that goes for $1,400 a night. You know, this is all on your money that they take from you. And I understand if you've got a bunch of people who are out there, you know, looting pigs and chickens from all across, you know, the British landscape here, you've got to pay them to keep them happy so that they don't sit there and say, what am I doing to my fellow Americans here? So you're gonna pay the looters a piece of the action to keep the looting going. That seems to be what's going on here. Over at Investment Watch blog story, IRS employees 4 conferences at Vegas casinos cost taxpayers a grand total of $671,000, including luxury hotel rooms, free drinks, free food. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. Every time I go to a conference or something, I have to pay for it out of my own pocket, which is why I don't do a lot of public appearances on the mainland. Congressman Diane Black says it's very chilling. The IRS is behaving like we're, you know, in a dictatorship. And she's absolutely right. It's the instrument of the tyranny and political repression here. Apparently, fear of the Internal Revenue Service is so high. This is being reported over at Ex Republic TV. FBI agents who are testifying to Congress about what the IRS has been doing are doing so with their identities hidden. They're asking for protection, anonymity, because they don't want the Internal Revenue Service to come in and start auditing them for the rest of their life. Now, the IRS agents who were initially blamed for this aren't rolling over and playing dead. They see that bus coming, and they're trying to get out of the way. And we're again hearing from, this is from the Trenches World Report, where a new testimony from IRS employees are that, yes, they got orders to target the Tea Party and other groups direct from Washington, D.C. back in 2010 here. Now, it's rather amazing to watch these public hearings and to see the machinations that are going on out there. Apparently, a Democratic Representative, Earl Blumenauer, was out there saying this is all a charade. You know, you groups, you're all political. You should have come under scrutiny. It's really all, you're just making a big deal about this because you don't like the president. Didn't quite get up and say you just hate black people, but that's going to be coming somewhere down the road. McDermott is out there pushing the line about we don't need to find out how it happened before. We'll just pass new laws to fix the problem and for future generations. And, of course, what McDermott is ignoring is what was going on was already illegal. There are already laws that were not being enforced against this kind of behavior. And what is coming out of this is we're seeing this democratic, unified front to try and make this scandal go away. And when they're working this hard and saying things this silly, that tells us they know this scandal goes all the way to the Oval Office. We'll be right back after these words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Dave in Oklahoma, if you're still listening to the broadcast, over the break I found 3 articles on the health benefits of nicotine, and I posted them to whatreallyhappened.com so you can take a look at them. And there's nothing that's completely bad or completely good. I mean, obviously there's a downside to smoking, but the new e-cigarettes seem to get around that situation. And the fact is that, yeah, it's been known for a long time. There is an upside to nicotine. And they're finally starting to look at it. Of course, there's not a lot of support for this kind of thing, because if you're a smoker and you don't get Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, then Big Pharma can't sell you medications every month to treat the symptoms. As I said the other day, nobody's really interested in preventatives or cures. The big money is in managing the symptoms. But it is out there, and I got into this with a discussion with a friend regarding the e-cigarettes and whether they should be subject to the same restrictions in terms of public smoking as regular tobacco. And so we're not going to get into that debate here, but it does turn out there is an upside to nicotine. It's not entirely bad and evil or all the rest of that. It's been demonized, much the way that marijuana was demonized. We're going to be talking about marijuana a little bit later in the show as well here. So we're looking at all of these hearings going on for IRS Gate, and we are seeing a unified front among the Democrats to throw the blame back onto the victims of the targeting, or to adopt McDermott's position of, we don't care how it happened this last time, we don't need to know, we'll pass new laws to make this behavior illegal. There are already laws that make this behavior illegal. Abuse of the IRS for political purposes was one of the articles of impeachment for Richard Nixon, so it's been illegal all along. And for the Democrats to be working this hard to blame the victims and try and take the focus off of who did what tells us they know this went all the way to the Oval Office. And they're not really thinking all that much about Obama because he's in his second term and he can't run again. But obviously IRS Gate is going to be a major issue in the 2016 elections. And with a scandal like this, it's going to shift public opinion away from the Democrats and back over to the Republicans, which won't really solve the problem, but that's what's going to happen. Politics is perception. Now, getting on to Benghazi Gate, a very, very interesting development here. Tom Donilon, the current National Security Advisor, is resigning, supposedly to spend more time with his family and his wife, who has a new job, and he's got to be at home. The usual public face of a resignation. I think they want him out of the line of fire before Congress starts asking him embarrassing questions. And Susan Rice, the current U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, is finally going to get that National Security Advisor position that she has always wanted. She wasn't able to get it the last time she was going for it because of all the confusion coming out of Benghazi. And you need to remember, Susan Rice was caught lying about what happened in Benghazi, but she fell on her sword for her Emperor Obama, and now she's getting her reward. And we're starting to see, as people start questioning Benghazi and looking with highly skeptical eyes at the official story, which is what the U.S. government gets after that whopper about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. People are looking at all the evidence, and others are starting to come to the same conclusion I did. This was supposed to be a staged piece of theater, to be Obama's October surprise to recapture the public imagination and support going into last year's elections. And there's this retired four-star admiral, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he came out saying essentially the same thing. So I'm not the only one who has come to this conclusion. And as more and more people look at the available facts, and especially all those stand-down orders, which make no sense at all unless somebody very high up in the government wanted this attack to go forward. And they were blaming it on that non-existent Mohammed bashing movie. There was that trailer that was rushed out onto YouTube, and they said, oh, this is why all those Muslims are angry and rising up. And it turned out there actually wasn't a movie behind it. Somebody took some clips from another movie, overdubbed them, put it into a trailer, and said, see, this is why they're angry. It was definitely a rush job, looking at the way it was edited here. And I also noticed there is a new tactic being employed called muddying the waters. This is a classic propaganda technique. When somebody is out there with a discussion that is getting a little too close to the truth, the propagandists will throw out all kinds of alternative ideas, and some of them are nonsensical, but the goal is to trick people into arguing back and forth over the fine details of what happened in order to delay or prevent the formation of a public consensus. And the one they threw out here today is an al-Qaeda source says that the ambassador was killed with lethal injection when al-Qaeda realized the kidnap wasn't going to work. And even in these articles, they admit there's absolutely no way to substantiate this claim, but they're going to throw it out there so they can come back to the staged October surprise and say, well, that's only one of the theories that's being discussed out there. And you've got to look at this theory and that theory, and next we'll have space aliens in a UFO killed the ambassador. That's how desperate they are. But again, this is the big scandal that nobody wants to come out. And they're going to keep the focus on IRS and Department of Justice, and they're hoping you're not going to pay attention to Benghazi. Don't let them tell you what you should be thinking about. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we have been talking about the revelation that officials within the Obama administration were making a habit of using multiple email addresses, some of which had fictitious names, in order to conduct business away from scrutiny. Now, the way it's supposed to work is those officials are working for the American people. Their salaries come from tax money. All their work product belongs to the American people. Period. End of discussion. And in response to civil suits, congressional investigations, FBI investigations, the investigators are supposed to be able to go over to the White House and say, we have a subpoena. We have a warrant for all the emails for this person from this date to this date. And the use of these alternate email addresses with bogus names is clearly intended to conceal from investigators actions that the Obama administration wishes to keep hidden. So we're talking about cover-up as an institutionalized process within the entire administration. Now we're getting another interesting story. This is coming out of Associated Press, where in order to get a list of email addresses for political appointees within the Obama administration, the Labor Department wanted to charge Associated Press $1 million for the costs associated for retrieving those email addresses. $1 million. That's what they said it was going to cost. Well, I think the goal here is that very much they did not want Associated Press to have those email addresses, because I happen to know for a fact there are computers at the White House. And you have a list of your political appointees with their email addresses. It doesn't take $1 million worth of work to collate that together and get it out to the Associated Press. And again, all of that information is technically public property, a public record, and should have been provided for free. So now we're seeing the Obama administration using huge unrealistic fees to try and discourage investigation by the corporate media. And more we're starting to see the corporate media is realizing they're being treated more and more like the independent media, and we're starting to find ourselves on the same line over here in terms of Department of Justice, FBI investigation and harassment, IRS harassment, being shut out from, by the government. Got to be a little bit of a paradigm shift for all those people at the corporate networks to realize we're actually rather aligned on this issue of press freedom. Now, over in Syria, major developments. The Syrian forces are in full control of the Qusayr area, and now they're getting ready to move on the city of Homs, but they have taken complete control of it. Major victory here. The General Command of the Syrian Army is saying victory in Al-Qasir sends clear message to all of those involved in the aggression against Syria. And he's basically saying, all of you hired mercenaries, you're losing. You're losing big. And it gets even worse than that. Let's see, some of the Pravda is saying the Western-backed terrorists in Syria are running like rats, which may be insulting to the rats here. But that's definitely not going good for the U.S. and Israel in Syria. And again, between these recent setbacks for the hired mercenary army and the potential loss of the Turkish front may motivate either Israel or the U.S. to simply go for it right now and just haul off and do a clear-out attack and say, it's over and done with, what are you going to do? Meanwhile, after taking control of the city of Al-Qasir, the Syrian army found mass graves of rebel fighters, hired mercenaries, who had been killed, and they've so far found some 400 bodies, which is another indicator things are not going anywhere near as well for this covert mercenary army as we may have been told in the corporate media, and certainly from the statements from the White House here. Russia is coming out highly critical of the United States' refusal to rule out a Syrian no-fly zone. Now, Russia is already opposing this at the Security Council, and most observers around the world agree establishment of a no-fly zone constitutes an act of war against Syria. And remember, there is no congressional declaration of war against Syria for the president to act on. And given that the U.S. has been covertly supporting the hired mercenaries for more than 2 years, the time limit on the War Powers Act has already run out. So this aggression against Syria is unconstitutional. Obama has clearly exceeded his authority in continuing to support this thing. Now, down in the Golan Heights, they're preparing for war. They're preparing for the possibility that Israel is going to attack Syria across the Golan and try and grab a larger part of that country for itself. And they can see kind of what's going on. Meanwhile, we're getting word from stratrisks.com that U.S. bases in the Arabian Gulf are now on high alert for what is being described as anticipation of any kind of fallout to the security deterioration in Syria and Iraq, and quite possibly Turkey as well. So everybody is rattling the sabers as hard as they can. Meanwhile, up in Afghanistan, Refreshing News 99 is commenting that the Pentagon has absolutely no clue what 108,000 contractors are doing up there in Afghanistan. They're paying the money, they're shelling the money out, and they have no idea what these people are there for or what they're doing that's of any possible benefit. And the Government Accountability Office is saying the Pentagon is unable to document the work these contractors are doing. The money is going out. Nobody knows what, if anything, of value is being done. It's just more cash pouring into the military-industrial complex. Now, over in Iran, Iran has now summoned the Qatari envoy after arresting what they called a terrorist group that was planning sabotage and terrorist activities ahead of the June 14th presidential election to try and disrupt Iran, to steer the election, terrorist attacks in the pro-Ahmadinejad districts. Same thing we've seen time and time again. And, of course, Iran was on the lookout for this because of that failed attempt at a U.S. coup back in 2009. And so now they caught these Qataris, and they're going to protest diplomatically here. Meanwhile, a little bit of embarrassment over in Egypt. Some politicians there, parliamentarians, who were unaware there was a live camera on them at the time, are threatening Ethiopia with war regarding Ethiopia's plan to dam the Nile River and divert its water for their own use, which means far less water continuing down the Nile into Egypt. Egypt sees this as a clear threat to their agriculture, to their ability to have water for their people. And these politicians in Egypt came out and basically said, for all intents and purposes, they're already in a state of war with the United States and Israel. Now, that last part may be one of those deliberate mistranslations that we see coming out of institutions like Memory. But there's a lot of anger in that part of the world, a lot of anger with Israel and the United States, and I don't blame them one bit here. Over in the Pacific, our part of planet Earth here, Japan is going to join this U.S.-led military drill on capturing island territory. So they're getting ready to go to war with China over these islands in the East China Sea. And again, everybody wants a war. Get into a financial mess, we'll get into a war, people will forget the economic hardship, they'll salute the flag, they'll throw their children onto the enemy's bayonets. And that may have worked during big mistake number 1 and big mistake number 2. It's not going to work this time. Because the world is a very, very different place, and the people of planet Earth understand what's going on. All these wars are really bankers' wars. It's all about, tricking the people out of their money, out of their freedom, out of their children's lives. They've had enough of that. Over in Pakistan, the drone attacks are continuing to have negative repercussions. Pakistan is rapidly becoming radicalized, which is the politically correct term for really angry with the United States for killing all these innocent people. And it's rather amazing to see the U.S. government sort of hem and haw about these 3 Americans who were accidentally killed by these drones, like that's the scale of the entire problem, and it isn't. Every time there is one of these drone strikes, an average of 50 innocent bystanders get killed. That's a horrible ratio, 50 to 1. And remember, it came out not too long ago. The U.S. government actually knows that many of those people in Guantanamo are innocent of any crime against the United States, but they're keeping them there in Guantanamo anyway because it would be a political embarrassment to let them go and say, golly, I guess we were wrong. We tortured some innocent people. So these intentional targets, Obama's kill list, we don't know if they're actually guilty of anything. Many of the names on that list are derived by simply going around and offering huge cash rewards. Point out a terrorist, we'll give you money. And so let's say there's this little village in Pakistan and there are 2 bakers, one on each side of the town square. And because there's competition, the prices are down. So this one baker goes to the U.S. forces and say, that other baker across the courtyard, he's making bread for Al-Qaeda to smuggle over the border. And the U.S. says, yes, we've got another terrorist suspect. And they drone strike that other baker. The baker who ratted him out gets his money, and he gets an exclusive market. Or it could be, 2 guys are after the same girl. And one guy decides to get rid of his romantic competition by claiming he's a terrorist to the U.S. There has been no evidence presented that any of these drone strike targets are actually guilty of any crimes. Certainly they've never had their day in court, never had their trial by jury of their peers, no evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. It's terrorism. It's robotic terrorism directed against the people of Pakistan to try and get them to go along with whatever the U.S. agenda is. Obama's drone strikes are no different in their political intention than Nazi Germany's V-1 buzz bomb and V-2 ballistic missiles, fired into Great Britain, hitting random targets. They weren't that accurately guided back then. It was considered amazing they hit the right island. And it was done by Nazi Germany to terrorize the British people into pressuring their government to capitulate to the Nazis' demands. And it didn't work. It angered the British people more firmly into supporting the British government. And the same thing's happening in Pakistan. And remember that classic definition of insanity. Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. The V-1 and V-2 did not help the Nazis. The drone strikes are not helping Obama. Now, we're still seeing the fallout over that discovery of mass tombs dating back to the 1948 creation of Israel. And so far, they have found 4 of these mass graves, and they're now saying there's probably going to be more of them. And it basically showed that Israel, these armed gangs from Irgun, Stern, and Haganah, were simply collectively killing hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to drive them out of their lands to create Israel. And Israel's never been held to account for this or any of the other atrocities they're guilty of. Sabra and Shatila, the attack on the USS Liberty. We're still trying to get Joe Meador's survivor of Israel's attack on the USS Liberty to come on the show on Friday. You cannot have a modern civilized world where all of the nations of Earth agree to abide by certain conventions of behavior but one. You can't have a stable civilization that way. Now, Lindsey Graham is out there still screaming about how bloggers, he's not sure bloggers deserve First Amendment protection. Well, the First Amendment in and of itself applies to everybody. If bloggers don't have First Amendment protection, then nobody does in this country. But what Lindsey Graham is really talking about is the courts have consistently cited the First Amendment in legal protections for journalists to prevent them from being harassed and threatened and punished for doing their job. And what Lindsey Graham is trying to say is that anybody who is not in the officially licensed media, ABC, NBC, CBS, and so forth, that they shouldn't be accorded those protections so that the government can come down and slam on them for exposing things that ought not to be exposed. So Graham basically came out and said, who is a journalist is a question we need to ask ourselves. Is any blogger out there saying anything? Do they deserve First Amendment protection? These are the issues of our time. Yeah, we're journalists. A journalist is anybody who is out there looking at the facts of what's going on and writing it down, possible with their analysis of what it all means. We are journalists. The big TV networks, TV itself, radio, telephone, telegraph did not exist when the First Amendment was written. It was written for printing presses. And as new technologies and methods come along, it's always been assumed the First Amendment applies to them as well. Up until now, where we have the Internet and the independent media, which are not subject to government control, and now all of a sudden the government is saying, oh no, we can't protect them, we can't acknowledge their journalists. I think Lindsey Graham is thinking about introducing legislation in the United States similar to what they're passing in Jordan, where websites will have to be licensed by the government in order to be out there on the Internet, which of course means anybody with an opposing point of view will not get that license. Just like with the IRS, those with opposing points of view did not get their 501c4 status here. Now, let's see. Okay, let's take a quick phone call. Werner in New Brunswick, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good afternoon, Mike. I just turned in, and I'm getting kind of upset when you always come with the same things about the Nazis in Nazi Germany, and about V1 and V2 strikes.
Yes.
Mike, are you aware that for 4 months the British Air Force was bombing civilian targets, small towns along the North Sea?
Now, wait a minute. Werner, I'm not going to get into the details of who was justified for doing what. What I was talking about is the V1 and V2 were basically terror weapons. Their guidance systems were not sophisticated enough to hit specific targets like government buildings or military facilities. They were falling on civilian areas, and the rationale behind that was to terrorize the British people into pressuring their government to capitulate. And it didn't work. And Obama's drone strikes into Pakistan, where they're just killing all these innocent people, is clearly attempting to impose the same policy, and it's not going to work there any longer. So we're going to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the corporate media is spending a lot of time between that collapsed building in Philadelphia and this 10-year-old who needs the lung transplant. And they're making a big deal over, why is she not getting the priority when she's so close to death? And now there's a lawsuit being filed. And it's a tragic story, because I understand that a lot of people need transplants and there isn't enough raw material, which is why you have this huge black market organ trading, organ brokering scandal going on all around the world here. But again, it doesn't affect me and it doesn't affect you. We're getting back into fluffiness, so forth and so on. Now, responding back to Werner's concerns here, and I didn't want to get into who's right and wrong in war, because in my opinion, both sides are wrong in a war. war means your foreign policy has failed utterly. You're not able to run your country in a peaceful way, peace through commerce. And I'm not entirely unsympathetic to Germany's position in that. We've talked a long time about how it was the banker boycott against Germany of 1933 that put the world on that path to big mistake number 2. I merely wanted to point out the thinking behind the V1 and V2 is virtually the same as the thinking behind the drone strikes. It's a campaign of terror to get the population to pressure their government to capitulate to the policy of the aggressive power. And it didn't work in Britain, and it's not working in Pakistan. Now, we talked about this before, where Congress wants to expand the FBI surveillance powers on U.S. citizens, in particular electronic communication. And it's not just text messages now. They want to have backdoors built in so the FBI can look at your chat sessions, your video sessions, your Skype sessions. They want a completely open door to monitor you at all times. And we know the FBI has been caught time and time again engaging in insider trading on the basis of information they get with the surveillance. It was a huge scandal at the Seattle Asia-Pacific Economic Conference some years back, where the FBI was spying on conference attendees, stealing business secrets to give to favored political cronies. Because if you're going into a session to bid on a contract, and you know what your competition's bid is going to be, well, you can underbid them by $50 or $100 and get the contract. And that's why we should be opposed to all of this surveillance on the American people. I mean, even setting aside that Fourth Amendment situation, we cannot trust this government with our private messages, our private data. It's private for a reason. And we have seen a reckless disregard of our privacy by the government. And they will use that information. More about this when we come back from station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Robert in Missouri. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I just wanted to chime in about this drone policy of the occupational government here that they use abroad. And, you know, what I find in my sphere of people that I interact with, I work for a county government here in the St. Louis area. And what I notice is this complete lack of empathy for people in other countries of the world concerning how we just go invade their sovereign airspace with these UAVs and drop bombs on weddings, funerals, gatherings, whatever. And the way people think, you know, the people that I interact with, they're just like, they think it's just like somehow that Americans doing it to somebody over in, like, let's say Pakistan, Yemen, etc., that it's not a big deal. Like it's not, you know, bombing an equal person. Like somehow that somebody's a Pakistani, that they're, it's just those Muslims over there. You know, you gotta take these people out. It's like this programming is so pervasive and hard to get through that it's just like, you know, when you get into this whole terror apparatus, it's not really Muslims doing it. It's state sponsors behind it, and then they just glaze over when you talk to them about it. But it's really sick that we could be, you know, doing this to people in other parts of the world and then not expect it to happen to us when we travel abroad. You know, they're not looking at this blowback. You know, they all want to travel to Mexico or go on vacation somewhere, but when they get attacked, they're going to say, well, why did I get attacked? Well, look at what the government of your country is doing in your name, you know, in other people's lands. It's really sick.
No, you're absolutely right there. I mean, all these other countries, they don't hate us for our freedoms. We don't even have that many freedoms left here right now. They hate us because they have grown up seeing their friends, their neighbors, their fellow workers, their fellow students, their family members blown to bloody bits before their very eyes, and on the shrapnel it's stamped, made in the USA. And that's the reason. And you're absolutely right. There is a double standard in the media reporting of this. I mean, look at the huge, non-stop saturation propaganda coming out of the Boston bombing where 3 people were killed. And it's a tragedy 3 people were killed. But again, every time there's one of these U.S. drone strikes into Pakistan or Yemen or wherever else they're sending these drones, 50 innocent people are killed alongside with the target, and again, we don't even know that that target actually did anything to the United States to justify an extrajudicial execution.
Right, and it just to just run roughshod over another country's sovereign territory like we do. I mean, these people would go ballistic if if Russia or China had drones flying over Chicago or St. Louis or Honolulu or whatever. Mm-hmm. They would be crying till the day is over. We've got this moral authority because we're the United States to do this to these other countries. It's just beyond me how people can philosophically reconcile that in their own conscience and their own mind, and then sleep at night. It's really trippy. I wanted to segue into the CSPLA convention, which I attended over the weekend.
Good for you.
And, I wanted to comment on a couple things that kind of alarmed me. One of them was a guy, he was speaking, and they were talking about our immigration laws, okay, and how lax they are and how anybody can get into the country. And then this guy's up there speaking, and he's saying basically 9/11 could have been prevented if our immigration security apparatus was working the way it should have been. Basically, he was implying that these so-called 19 phantom hijackers would have been somehow prevented from getting in the country. And he was
look, they got infiltrated. And it does happen. There are always going to be troublemakers from working for the government getting into all these conferences. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, end of last week, there was a case up in Wisconsin, a gentleman by the name of Jeffrey Feldman, who was ordered to decrypt a computer drive for prosecutors. It was an encrypted drive. And this has raised quite a few issues regarding the Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination. And last week, the federal court in Wisconsin ordered him to decrypt his hard drives for the FBI or face a contempt of court charge. Now, a higher court judge has now granted an emergency injunction overruling the lower court order, saying that forcing somebody to decrypt a hard drive for prosecutors to find evidence to prosecute you, that does represent self-incrimination. And this has been going back and forth. There have been prior cases where this has already been ruled on, that you have a right to say, I've encrypted this for a reason, and you don't have a right to force me to decrypt it. If your cryptographers can't break it, then you're just out of luck. And we need to do that. We need to fight for what's left of our privacy. And again, this whole idea about if you've done nothing wrong, you have nothing to fear from constant government surveillance or having people peek over your shoulder. Well, if that was true, shouldn't that also apply to the government? And yet we see all these Obama officials with their secret email addresses with bogus names on them that are trying to keep what they're doing hidden. Shouldn't we have the same right, the same ability, and same authority? And again, this is not just an issue about people who have committed some kind of a crime. We have a legitimate need to keep our lives private from the government because government cannot be trusted. And again, this goes back to all these FBI agents and other intelligence agents who have been arrested and charged for insider stock trading because they're peeking into your computer and they're saying, oh, this guy's company just came up with a brand new product and it's going to hit the market next Thursday and their stock's going to go up. I better go and buy some stock. That's not what the data is for. I remember when I was working on, well, virtually all of the TV and film projects I've worked on, my laptop has video clips and images that are proprietary to the production and cannot be allowed out. They show goofs, they show things that should not be made public. And I remember the few times I had to go through the airports, I was always scared. Some TSA bozo was going to find something on my laptop and sell it to the fan magazines, and I'd be in trouble for it. They cannot be trusted. By the way, on 3 occasions during the production of Lost, because we don't actually have a film lab here in Hawaii that can process motion picture film. Moot point now, everybody's gone digital. But back, Lost was still being shot on regular film, and the exposed film had to be sent to the mainland to be processed, printed into dailies, and the dailies were sent back on DVD. On 3 occasions, despite very clear labels saying exposed film, do not open, the TSA, who I presume cannot read, opened those cans of exposed film and cost us days of production, which on a TV series, that's a serious problem. With a commercial or a movie, you can, take an extra day to deliver. But when you have to hit that broadcast date every single week, losing a reel of, 1,000-foot reel of film, that's a lot of work and a lot of money. They can't be trusted, and you shouldn't trust them. The biggest reason not to trust the government is that it is the government. And I'm glad this federal judge has reaffirmed the Fifth Amendment right to not incriminate yourself regarding your encrypted data. And I'm going to take a wild guess here that there really isn't much of anything on that hard drive, because I think anybody who really had something to keep it secret, they're not going to put it on a hard drive. They're going to put it on a flash drive that can be hidden someplace. Those little micro SD cards, they're the size of your little fingernail, and they're up to 64 gigabytes. You can hide them in those little hollowed-out coins. They're just fishing. They're fishing to find something that they can make an arrest over and get some newspaper coverage and say, see, we're doing our job, keep our funding, keep us, give us a larger budget, blah, 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 blah. Meanwhile, we're getting the story off the Electronic Frontier Foundation, where the United Nations is starting to develop policy regarding Internet surveillance and free speech, and understands that total surveillance of the Internet does stifle the free expression of ideas, just like Erdogan is doing over there, arresting people who were using Twitter to say, hey, there's a protest. So even the UN is starting to back off this idea that government should have completely unrestricted access to all of your online activity. And there's another aspect you need to keep in mind. Every back door that these software providers, internet service providers are being ordered to install to allow the government to simply come in and peek at you at any time are going to be found and exploited by the cyber criminals. This is going to trigger a huge explosion in cybercrime, stealing your bank account info, stealing your personal information, finding pictures that can be used to blackmail you. But the government obviously doesn't care about that. They don't care that the American people are going to be left wide open to an epidemic of cybercrime. The federal government is in a state of deep paranoia. And this we are watching everything is the only way they can assuage those symptoms. Because obviously the SSRIs aren't working very well. And that's another reason to oppose this. We have a right to be secure in our persons and effects against unreasonable search and seizure. It's in the Bill of Rights. And it is the Bill of Rights. It's not the Bill of Suggestions. We're going to go back to the phones here. Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. About the encrypted hard drive. Yeah, it's like definitely Bill of Rights. We're supposed to be free from unreasonable search and seizure, but we also have the concept of getting a search warrant in the event of reasonable suspicion or probable cause.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm wondering, how is asking someone to decrypt a hard drive that much different than compelling someone to open a locked safe when a warrant is in possession and being served? You see, somebody might have documents in a locked safe, and they would be compelled to open the safe if there was a search warrant.
Well, you raise a very good point, but I think the difference is that the FBI can come in and cut that safe open on their own. And if the FBI's cryptographers could come in and read the hard drive, I'd say that your point has merit. But in this case, the difference is requiring or being dependent on a voluntary act of the suspect. And I think that's why the Fifth Amendment comes into play here.
Well, I believe if if the suspect is home at the time when the police arrive with a warrant and they tell him to open the safe and he refuses, I don't believe he can refuse under the circumstances without being charged with something.
He can certainly refuse, and at that point the police or the FBI would get out that big honking saw and simply cut into the safe. And I think that is the difference.
Okay, so he can refuse without being charged with some sort of contempt or something like that?
Well, that's what the judge was trying to say here, but I mean, that's the difference. If they have a warrant to open a safety deposit box or something, they'll just go in and they'll open the safety deposit box. The issue here is that despite all of the claims about the prowess of the National Security Agency and the rest of it, a lot of modern cryptographic tools are beyond their ability to break into, especially if you're developing your own encryption system. And so I think that is really the difference. If they have a warrant to go into a safe or a safety deposit box and the owner refuses to assist them, they can still cut in and get the evidence. The difference here is that when the owner of the hard drive refuses, the FBI lacks the skills and talent and tools to go in and get the information themselves, and I think that's why it's a Fifth Amendment issue here. Okay? That's
even prior to assessing the FBI skills, the question is, is the party, when they have a warrant, guilty of obstruction if he refuses to open the safe?
Well, they can probably do that with the owner of the hard drive as well.
Right. That's my point. They can charge him with obstruction.
The only difference between these two cases is that in the case of a safe or a safety deposit box, the FBI and the police can execute that warrant on their own. And it doesn't require a voluntary act on the part of the suspect to let him get that information. In the case of the hard drive, obviously the FBI can't read the information on their own. And they're requiring the voluntary cooperation of the suspect to incriminate himself, and at that point it is a violation of the Fifth Amendment. And I'm glad the judge ruled this way, because we know how large modern hard drives are, and whatever evidence is in there, there's going to be a lot of other stuff that they can simply go fishing through. But again, for me, it comes down to the fact that the government cannot be trusted with your information, because they use it for purposes unrelated to law enforcement or fighting terrorism. We saw that up at the Seattle Asia-Pacific Economic Conference, where the FBI was just there to loot corporate business secrets on behalf of political cronies. And I don't want that to happen. And I don't think it should be allowed to happen. Remember, the whole point of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights was to deliberately weaken the federal government in order to protect the people. And if you look at a comparison of the 9th and 10th Amendments, it becomes very, very clear that the Founding Fathers intended to bias the system in favor of the people and to put the government at a permanent disadvantage, and we need to keep them there. So we're coming up on a commercial break. Thank you very much for the phone call. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America, and welcome back to the show here. And a lot of this surveillance, and we're going to look at your computers and everything, it's a scare campaign to scare you into being silent. Same reason that Erdogan is arresting Twitter users, to keep people isolated, to keep them from communicating with each other. And this idea of you go through the airport and the TSA is allowed to simply scan off the entire memory of your laptop or tablet or iPhone, it's nonsense. It's a propaganda campaign. They're not going to really find terrorists. I mean, how long has the TSA been in business? They haven't actually found a single real terrorist in all that time. Given out a lot of cancer, stolen a lot of stuff out of a lot of luggage, groped a lot of crotches. For all we know, they're the leading cause of the spreading of sexually transmitted diseases, because those gloves they wear are not for your protection, it's for the TSA's protection. And they'll wear the same gloves for 20, 30, 40, 50 people they grope, passing who knows what from traveler to traveler to traveler. Anybody who's really engaged in crime or terrorism is not going to leave the data where it can be found. I mean, after the TSA broke a very expensive laptop of mine, now I have a little tiny netbook that I travel with. We used to have an advertiser on the website. For those of you who are watching on Justin TV, it was called spycoins.com. And they sell these little hollowed-out coins. This is a nickel, and it looks just like an ordinary nickel, but there's enough room in there for one of those micro SD memory cards. And they're up to 64 gigabytes in size. So whatever you're working on that you don't want the government to be able to look at, whether it's your bikini pictures collection or your plans for the new product that you're getting ready to take to market, that's where you're going to keep it. You're going to keep it offline. You're going to keep it off the machine. So the government's just involved in fishing expeditions. We'll find something on you. We're going to get you for something we can prosecute you for to prove how butch the FBI is. By the way, did you know the FBI actually had the Japanese plans for the attack on Pearl Harbor 3 months before it happened? It got them from a British double agent codenamed Tricycles. Real name was Dusko Popov. And he handed them the entire plan, and the FBI said, we don't believe this. Or at least that's the official story here. Now, I want to get on to an interesting article. This came out of Gilad Atzmon's website, The London Declaration on Anti-Semitism. And he calls it A Glimpse into Jewish Phobia. And one of the reasons I think Israel is getting ready to launch a major escalation of the wars by going into Syria, bombing Iran, whatever, is over the last couple of weeks, we're seeing anti-Semitism waved all over the media. You've got to just shut up about Israel or you're an anti-Semite. And if you'll remember that video from Democracy Now! Where Amy Goodman interviewed a former member of the Knesset, and this member of the Knesset was very honest and said, it's a trick. It's a trick we used to shut people up about what's going on. And they're waving anti-Semitism this all over the place. And we're seeing other countries like Greece has now been convinced to introduce legislation outlawing criticism of Israel, outlaw questioning of the Holocaust. You need to remember, truth needs no laws to defend it. Truth survives re-examination. Truth survives questioning. Throughout history, from Galileo to Zundel, only lies and liars resort to the courts of law to enforce adherence to a particular dogma. And the whole point of this article coming out of Gilad is that Israel is realizing this hammerlock on world perception that they've had over the last few decades is slipping. Israel is being seen more and more as an apartheid state that engages in atrocities and just screams, we're the victim, in the hope that people will go away. But that's not working any longer. As I've mentioned before, they've overplayed that anti-Semitism card. It's lost its shock value. Nobody cares anymore. You're an anti-Semite. Okay. Who cares anymore? It's really what it is. It's lost its effectiveness. Alrighty, turning to the economic news. Over at UCLA, we're getting word from a UCLA report from their economists saying that they're seeing a dismal picture of economic recovery. And they're saying that, yeah, there may be more jobs and a little more gross domestic product, but it's not enough to rebuild a strong middle class. And they're saying good jobs are simply not appearing. And, of course, we've been talking about that before. And this is bolstered by another report that was actually in the Los Angeles Times, that U.S. workers are working harder. They are more productive. They're producing more work for the hours they work, and yet they are still being paid less. Now, another article that came out, and this was over at Washington's blog, talking about the real reason housing prices have skyrocketed. And this gets back to what I was saying before about how bankers want housing to be expensive because then they make more money off of you. We're coming up on a commercial break here, but basically this article is saying that lenders are artificially keeping houses off the market. More about this when we come back. And aloha America, welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about the fact that housing prices are going up. And this article that is coming out of Washington's blog is saying there are two major factors. One is that lenders, mortgage companies that have foreclosed on properties are keeping them off of the market to prevent a market glut that would drive real estate prices down. And the Obama administration has been creating all of these incentives, financial incentives at institutional investors to pump up the prices. And we're getting this other report here that came over from the New York Times saying that Wall Street investment firms are buying up empty houses in order to keep them off the market and shove the prices back up again. Now, the motive for this is really very simple. If you could pay off your house in 5 or even 10 years, once it's paid off, you are of no more use to the bankers. You are free and clear, and bankers hate free and clear. It's not the way they operate. The whole idea of modern banking, the essence of the modern banking industry, is to keep us all, whether we are nations or individuals, slave to their debt. Now, the other reason is very, very simple. If housing prices were to drop, a lot of current home owners would realize they're now underwater. Their mortgage, they owe more on the mortgage than their house is worth. They might voluntarily default. And it all starts coming apart. And the other reason, of course, is these financial institutions that have taken all these homes in foreclosures, many of them fraudulent, now carry the value of those homes on their books in order to stay solvent. That little monthly payment you were making wasn't going to keep them from collapsing. They needed your entire house on their books right now. That's what triggered this foreclosure gate, all the fraudulent foreclosures that were going on. And if housing prices drop, these institutions would be insolvent overnight. They're trapped by keeping the housing prices high, just like they're trapped trying to keep the stock prices high. And they're not doing very good on that right now, looking at the market today. Huge sell-off taking place. So that's the reason housing prices are being kept up. They don't want you to have affordable housing. They don't want you to have anything except products they sell you that break as soon as the warranty is over, so you go out and you buy another one. That is fascism. Now, looking over at the immigration bill, we're seeing this reported in Investment Watch blog, they're carving out room for an additional 600,000 guest workers every year. They want to bring in these educated, trained workers from other countries where the schools are still about education and not indoctrination, and they want to bring them into the United States because they're willing to work for less than American workers. Everything the government is doing, it's all for the benefit of Wall Street and the big corporations, and they just don't care about you anymore. Apparently, Federal Reserve Governor Janet Yellen, who is seen as a possible replacement for Bernanke as chairman, is striking a hard line, saying, no, we should not bring back Glass-Steagall. As you know, the U.S. Congress is looking at reinstituting Glass-Steagall now that the damage has already been done. Because it was the repeal of Glass-Steagall in 1999 that led to the current crash by allowing depositor banks and investment banks to merge and start playing reckless games with depositors' money. And that was not supposed to happen. That was a contributing factor to the Depression of the 1930s. That's why Glass-Steagall was passed. 1999, the deregulation clique came through and said, we don't need to have Glass-Steagall. The financial institution has evolved. We've matured. We are much more responsible. John McCain was in the forefront of saying, oh, we've got to take the shackles off of Wall Street and let them make all the money they want. And, of course, that's what led to the abuses, the mortgage-backed securities that led to this crash. Now, the money junkies made fine out of this. You, the American people, you got kind of bludgeoned about this. And now that the damage is done and the economy is in a shambles, Congress is going to try and act like they're doing their job and they're going to bring back Glass-Steagall. And Yellen is saying, absolutely not. We don't need Glass-Steagall here. So already we have Bernanke's successor out there saying, let's continue the same policies that allowed the big Wall Street financial firms to strip mine the wealth of America and put it in their pockets. Now, starting on Monday, a very interesting disclaimer was added to the website for the commodity exchange, the COMEX. And the disclaimer reads, the information in this report is taken from sources believed to be reliable. However, the Commodity Exchange Incorporated disclaims all liability whatsoever with regard to its accuracy or completeness. This report is produced for information purposes only. In other words, they've got this little disclaimer out there saying that it could very well be that their reports on the gold and silver inventory are fraudulent, and they are not to blame if it turns out to be the case. I think the timing of that little disclaimer indicates something. Over in Minnesota, they're already becoming aware that under the new Obamacare health insurance exchange, costs for consumers are going to skyrocket. We're seeing this all across the country where they're saying health insurance costs are going to go up by anywhere between 60% and 140%. Remember when Obama was selling Obamacare to the public and he said, you will pay less for your health insurance under my new system. Well, he lied to us again. Mr. President, your pants are on fire. This was a giveaway to the health insurance industry to allow them to grab more money from you. We were talking last week about this provision in Obamacare where your current health insurance provider can just arbitrarily cancel your policy and say it does not come up to the new standards of Obamacare and we are now terminating your coverage. But we have this selection of new policies for a lot more money that you can buy that will bring you into compliance. Just gouging the American people. Now, over in Britain, they're in a state of extremely high food and energy inflation. And, of course, ordinary British people, they're caught in a squeeze between rising taxes, rising costs, declining in their ability to earn money to pay all this stuff, and it shows the short-sightedness of the money junkies. Not just in England, not just in Europe, but here in the United States as well. Before you get money from the masses, you have to set things up so the masses are able to make the money to pay all these things that you want to be paid for. But we have all of these institutions of government and big business that are out there saying, we're going to force them to buy this, we're going to force them to buy that, the money's going to come pouring into us, and nobody is out there saying, how do we get these people the jobs that are going to allow them to afford all this stuff? Nobody seems to care about that. Oh, it's their problem how they're going to come up with that money. Let the girls go into prostitution. Let the guys run drugs or you know, rob 7-Eleven stores. We don't really care as long as the cash keeps pouring in here. It's money junkie thinking. And it's not what is best for the nation and its people. It's just what's best for the money junkies. Another article over at the Daily Mail, how Britain went from making things to sitting at a desk. Census reveals huge drop in people working in factories and farms. They're going through the same thing that the United States did. They've allowed their manufacturing and agriculture to decline, and the government mandates all kinds of paper-pushing jobs where you sit at a desk and you shuffle paper back and forth and, you know, you're told that's gainful, productive employment, and it really isn't, because you don't really have a product to sell to influence your balance of trade. It's like when I go down to the hardware store here and I buy a shovel or a hammer, and it's got all these stickers all over it, complies with federal regulation, blah, blah, blah. Do not use this hammer in a manner not suited for... And it's all just, it's job creation. They're creating jobs out of nothing to write and put on stickers that do not add value to the product, but certainly do add cost. And you cannot prosper a nation by just having everybody putting stickers on everybody else's product. That's overhead. It's not quality, it's not value. Now, interesting fact surface, we've often talked about Iceland and how Iceland did the right thing. When their banks went out of complete control, they threw their bankers in prison. They kicked out the government that helped the banks loot the people. They wrote off all the debt created through fraud, and Iceland's economy is doing really well, which is why you never hear about Iceland on the American media. Interestingly enough, a new scandal has surfaced there that shortly before that whole banking disaster in Iceland began, and there's that documentary Inside Job that really goes into this in detail. Iceland's banks were all public banks. They were owned and run by Iceland for the benefit of the Icelandic people, but they were privatized just a few years before that financial crisis, just before the Icelandic banks went on their borrowing and game playing that wrecked the place. And what's even more alarming is the fact-finding report commissioned by the Icelandic Parliament found out the bankers never actually paid anything to acquire the banks from the government or the people. Sweetheart deals and corruption. The public banks were simply handed to the private bankers, and look what happened. Didn't even pay a penny for it. That reminds me a lot about how when the Federal Reserve was created, the owners of the Federal Reserve bought it with Federal Reserve notes that they borrowed from their own printing presses. They didn't actually reach into their pockets for any of their own personal wealth. They scammed ownership of the Federal Reserve for themselves with the newly created Federal Reserve notes. It's a crooked system from top to bottom. And these private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest are the common enemy of all mankind. And it is time for them to go. Alrighty. Over at Blacklisted News, they're asking the question, does China plan to back the yuan with gold and make it the primary global reserve currency? China's already said that's the plan. And that's why the United States is starting to badmouth China and propagandize, ooh, those ugly Chinese, and they're trying to provoke that little war over those islands in the South China Sea. Because for this forcing of the world back onto Bretton Woods to work, it's an all-or-nothing deal. And with China pushing the gold yuan, they're now on the special high-interest targets list of the United States, just as Libya was when they came out with the gold-backed dinar. I don't want to go to war with China. I'm within easy reach of their nuclear missiles right now. Actually, you all are, but they can use a smaller missile to get over here to Hawaii. They're bad-mouthing Russia now because Russia took control of their central bank to turn the public currency back to a public utility, to stop it from being a privatized money-making scam for the money junkies. And that's what's so sick about all these wars. The United States fought a revolution to be free of this kind of banking, and now we're forcing that same failed system of banking on the rest of the world. It's the point of a bayonet here. Now, over in New York City, Bloomberg has fined a gift shop owner $60,000 for selling cigarette lighters shaped like guns. It's a toy gun. It's not a real gun, doesn't fire a bullet. It's a novelty item. Cigarette lighters are made in the shape of all kinds of bizarre things. And apparently this new New York City law makes it a crime to even sell toy guns. And they're hitting this guy with a fine that's probably going to put him out of business. It's just absurd, absolutely absurd here. Meanwhile, over in Colorado, the recall effort against the Colorado Senate president is moving forward. They apparently have twice the number of signatures required to force a special recall election. Don't know how they're going to shut that one down here. Meanwhile, over in our schools, kind of a bizarre situation. Schools in America are dropping classic books from their curriculum, like Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird and J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. And they're dropping all of these thought-provoking, insightful books in favor of what are called informational texts. We don't want you reading novels that might get you thinking. We're going to put our libraries and our curriculum around informational text. Information like, well, how human-caused global warming is wrecking the planet, why war is fun and glorious and glamorous, and why the Federal Reserve is the only way to run a national economy. Our schools are no longer about education. They're throwing education away. It's all indoctrination. You will believe, you will submit to authority, you will do as you're told. You won't think if you think the terrorists are going to win. Been another huge embarrassment where apparently a teacher in a classroom asked her students to bring Nerf guns for an experiment. Okay, now Nerf guns are foam rubber toys. They are completely harmless. And the school administration suspended all the students who showed up with those foam rubber guns. We have a zero tolerance policy. Do you have a zero idiocy policy here? Do you have a zero moronic policy here? Do you have a zero sphincters policy? I'd like to see that in our educational system here. Meanwhile, over in Calvert County, Maryland, an 11-year-old has been suspended from school for merely talking about guns. And get this, he was not in school. He was on the school bus ride home talking about how nice it would be to have a gun in case there was another Sandy Hook shooting at their school. This guy wanted to be able to protect his fellow students and teachers. And so he's talking about guns. The bus driver grabs the kid, drives back to the school to take him into the administration where he mentioned the word G-U-N, and he was suspended. The kid was not even in school. He was on the bus going home. You know what? That sounds like kidnapping to me. That bus driver does not have a right to take that kid to a destination other than where the kid wants to go. It's an attack on the Second Amendment. It's an attack on the First Amendment. This guy wasn't threatening anybody. He was saying he wanted to be able to protect his fellow students and teachers from a Sandy Hook attack, and they suspended him. Just absurd. Down in San Antonio, police tased a father who was trying to save his 8-year-old son from a fire. The kid died in the fire because his father was lying on the ground twitching and frothing at the mouth from the tasing. Amazing. Over in New York, apparently last Friday, there was a national security situation involving 30 agencies, including the DHS, searching for a terror threat. When you hear what it was, you will laugh. We'll be right back. So anyway, last Friday in New York, somebody called the police saying that they had seen people driving around with what looked like a bomb on a trailer. And by the time this thing got done, 30 agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security and even the Coast Guard, were looking for this terror threat. And it turned out to be some people who were driving around a reproduction of the Confederate submarine, the CSS Hunley. And it was just a replica. They were just taking it up to Connecticut for an event that was going to be happening over the weekend. And I saw a photo of this thing, and you look at it, and you immediately know it's a replica of the CSS Hunley. Anybody who is a student of history or watches TV, because it's been on TV enough time, you know that's what it is. 30 agencies went, oh, we've got a terror attack, we've got a terror attack. So we've got the LAPD that had a standoff with a statue of a Call of Duty character. You've got a full national security alert for a reproduction of a Confederate submarine. Yeah, we're impressed, guys. We're really impressed with the job that you're doing here. Over in Detroit, tragedy there during a police raid. Police killed a 7-year-old girl. I swear they have got to be on SSRIs over there. New report has come out from oceanographic monitoring stations in Point Reyes, California. There has been no sea level rise for 30 years. Remember when Al Gore bought his beachfront property and we all said, well, obviously he doesn't think the oceans are going to be rising and inundating the coastal zones from human-caused global warming? And now we're getting yet more confirmation. Nope, not happening. Not happening at all. It was just a big booga-booga to scare you out of your money and out of your obedience. The world is warming. It's all your fault. And you will atone by paying us money and bowing to our authority. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. Connecticut has now passed the first GMO food labeling law in the U.S. At the last second, a provision was added delaying implementation until other states start passing GMO product labeling, but that's going to happen eventually. It's going to happen eventually. And already Monsanto is pulling in their political favors, waving around campaign donations and such, trying to find some way that the federal government can derail this. They don't want to do it state by state. Cost them $45 million over in California to defeat Proposition 37. They figure that it's going to be cheaper to just go to Washington, D.C. and have the federal government say it is illegal for anybody to label GMO in this country. And I understand why there's so much pressure on this thing. Nobody else on planet Earth wants these things. So Monsanto's going to say, all right, well, we'll just sell it to the Americans. They'll eat anything we feed to them. Apparently over at a Catholic church, St. Francis de Sales Catholic Parish Church, somebody left a briefcase sitting idle. Police showed up, bomb squad showed up, just a briefcase with papers. They can't find any real terrorists or real bombs. That's why they're overreacting to all these other incidents. We've got to justify our budgets. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over in Kansas, a Kansas farmer is now suing Monsanto after discovering that his wheat crop is also contaminated with this GMO pollen that was recently discovered in Oregon. And right about now, I am sure that wheat farmers all over the country, and indeed all over the world, are rushing to their local laboratories to find out what the heck is going on. Now, Monsanto is still doing we have no idea. We stopped working with this stuff back in 2004. We have no idea how it got onto their fields. Ever hear of wind and honeybees? These money junkies, they're in charge of these companies, and they're total idiots. They're scientifically illiterate here. So it's apparently this scandal is already driving down wheat prices, and again, Japan, South Korea are not accepting any more American wheat shipments. Countries in Europe are starting to test what's coming in on those container ships, those dry goods ships. If they find the GMO contamination there, those cargoes are going to be refused. This is a major, major disaster. We already know from earlier in the week the manufacturing numbers for the United States have hit an all-time low. And now our agricultural exports are being rejected around the world because of this horrible, horrible experiment with genetic modification here. Now, there was an interesting article over at earthopensource.org called The Goodman Affair. Monsanto targets the heart of science. And this is a follow-on to yesterday's story where one of the key scientific journals, Chemical Toxicology, had hired a former Monsanto executive to decide what articles would and would not be published in their journal from there on. And this article over at Earth Open Source is talking about how Monsanto and other biotech companies literally are creating their own journals and putting articles in there which are little more than covert propaganda for their products, and they're selling this as if it is an independent journal, and it isn't, completely owned. This was the Australasian Journal of Bone and Joint Medicine. It was simply a public relations fraud. Nothing new about that. There was a scandal a while back involving, this is actually, I think, back in the 1990s, the National Skin Cancer Institute. And they were putting out all these public service messages about the importance of slathering on suntan oil when you went out in the sun to avoid all of these melanomas and everything. And people were saying, why don't you just tell people to wear a cover-up or wear a big hat? And it turned out this Skin Cancer Institute was created and funded by the Coppertone people. Now, a very interesting and alarming article. This was reported on Reuters. And we have talked before about the constant rush to create new patentable drugs, which can be sold on an exclusive basis at a high, high profit. And once a drug goes generic, they don't even pay attention to it any longer. And they're always trying to come up with something that's new that they can sell for the most money. And this story over in Reuters is saying that these new medications aren't even as effective against disease and symptoms as the old ones. It's just because they're new and can be patented, that's where the focus is in terms of R&D and marketing. And that they are not improvements on the old drugs from decades ago that have now gone generic. And they come out with the huge advertising, new drug here. Might kill you, but it's the newest drug. Tell your doctor. We'll be right back. I want to talk a little bit about Michael Douglas, the actor. And we all remember Wall Street, Romancing the Stone, a lot of fun movies. Good actor. I really like watching him. Supposedly attributed to him was a statement that his recent bout with throat cancer was not caused by drinking, not caused by smoking, but was caused by oral sex. And this went ballistic, especially with all the Gardasil people saying, see, this is why your children have to have the vaccination. We've got to protect you against the blah, 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 blah. Now, a Michael Douglas spokesman, Alan Burry, has already issued a statement clarifying that what Michael Douglas said is that maybe oral sex can cause cancer, but they have no way of knowing whether that was a factor or not in his own diagnosis. And he's absolutely correct about that. Now, as of the last time I was seeing this story being carried on the TV news networks, they were still going with that initial report. Oh, his throat cancer was caused by oral sex. And you should be thinking about vaccinating your children against blah, 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 blah. But Douglas has clarified that and said, well, it's a maybe situation. We don't really know. And by the way, a little tip of the hat to Michael Douglas for having the courage to take that role in Behind the Candelabra about Liberace, who was this amazing virtuoso piano performer, and who became a fixture of Las Vegas and had a very flamboyant lifestyle. And a huge amount of courage for Michael Douglas to take that kind of a role. And so I have to admire him for that. I admire actors who will break out of their comfort zone and do something just so dramatically different, shows their range. And I watched part of the movie, and he was doing a really good job. He convinced me. And so I'm glad he survived his cancer, and I'm glad he clarified his statement on that whole situation there. Now, a couple of breaking stories we need to get out here. The Los Angeles police have now cleared the Los Angeles police for the firing of Christopher Dorner, which led, of course, to the mass shooting and the eventual burning him alive in that cabin up there by Big Bear. So we have it on final authority. The Los Angeles Police Department, fresh from their standoff with that statue in the computer game company, have cleared the Los Angeles police of any wrongdoing and inappropriate behavior regarding the firing that led to that killing. The ACLU is now calling for an independent probe into the shooting of Ibrahim Todashev. That's the kid down in Florida, was being interviewed by the FBI over and over and over again, trying to link the Tsarnaev brothers to that triple drug murder up in Massachusetts. And originally the FBI said, oh, he attacked us with a knife, like how he got a knife in there after 5 hours of FBI interview. By the way, something I hadn't known before, the young man was recovering from knee surgery, which makes the idea that he was lunging at the FBI or threatening them or going to hit him with a stick or stab him with a pencil or something even that much more difficult to believe. And remember, this kid was shot 7 times total. The last shot was into the back of his head, execution style. And nobody's buying the FBI's story on this one, and well, they should, because it is the FBI. And now the ACLU is saying there has to be an independent inquiry. How this kid wound up dead. Remember, the FBI was saying, oh, he was on the verge of confessing. He had already verbally told us that, yes, the Tsarnaev brothers were evil. They were involved in drug murders, all this other thing that should silence those people who think that there's something funny about the official story of the Boston bombing. And they've made matters worse here. And what I think is most likely happened, they had a pre-written confession. They were trying to coerce this Ibrahim into signing. He refused to do it and tried to leave. And the FBI realized he was going to leave. The first thing he's going to do is call the independent media and say, the FBI were trying to force me to sign a fraudulent confession. And that's when things got out of control and this kid wound up dead. And in terms of public perception, they've already completely undermined the credibility of this so-called investigation into the Tsarnaev brothers with this stunt here. Alrighty, we're going to grab a quick phone call here. Alex in Florida. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Not much, Michael. I always drop off the phone. It's not your network. I just want to let you know, basically, I'll just ask you a question and hang up.
Okay.
That's okay. Is there any credible evidence or studies that have determined that oral sex causes cancer?
Well, the theory is that the human papillomatosis virus, which causes cervical cancer, can be transmitted through oral contact. But the point of the story here is that Michael Douglas's original statement was misquoted, and everybody went to town on the misquote to push this Gardasil vaccine, which has made a lot of the kids that it's been administered to very, very sick. you're vaccinating the population against an illness they've got a less than 0.1% chance of ever encountering in their lifetime, and the Gardasil vaccine only lasts for 5 years, and they're giving it to kids at such a young age, they're not even going to physically mature and become sexually active until the shot wears off, at which point they will need another shot. It's just all marketing and money. And Michael Douglas's spokesman has come out and basically said that's not what he said. He said maybe. Could have been the smoking, could have been the drinking, could have been oral sex, could have been who knows whatever.
So that's the HPV, which is cervical warts and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's the that's what they're trying to link it to and push the Gardasil vaccine here. But again, they took Michael Douglas's original statement and they misquoted it. They originally quoted him as saying that's what had caused his throat cancer. Wasn't the smoking, wasn't the drinking, wasn't the rest of that. Yes, it was definitely this sexual thing, and it's a great marketing opportunity for Gardasil. And now the statement.
Is this the Michael Douglas that must be 90? Or which Michael Douglas is this? Is this the one that had his own talk show?
No, this is Kirk Douglas's son. He did Romancing the Stone. He did Falling Down, which I really loved that movie. You know, it was a really good movie, Falling Down. And I did Wall Street and Wall Street Money Never Sleeps, that Michael Douglas.
Okay, thank you, sir. I love your show, okay? All right. Best wishes to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, earlier in the show, in response to a caller, I was talking about research that shows nicotine does have an upside. Yes, there are things about smoking that are bad for you, but there is an upside to nicotine. It's been known for a great many years that smokers have a far less chance of coming down with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease. In fact, one of the articles that I found and linked during that commercial break showed that nicotine actually improves your memory as well. And following on that same kind of idea, there is a new study out, and this was reported over at collectiveevolution.com, where cannabinoids, that's the part of marijuana that intoxicates you and makes you buzzed, improves the efficiency of mitochondria and helps to remove damaged brain cells. Now, there was another study that showed smoking marijuana stimulated growth of new brain cells. Alcohol destroys brain cells. Marijuana smoking improves brain cells. And I remember there was that embarrassment where Cheech Marin, who's not shy about how much he enjoys the so-called evil weed, went on Jeopardy against one of the corporate media's supposed intelligent, educated talking heads. I forget which one it was, but a guy whose reputation was he's smart, he knows it all. And Cheech Marin just clobbered him. And I got a chance to meet and talk with Tommy Chong when he came out here to Hawaii for his Marijuana Logs show. And he's a very intelligent, smart guy. And you kind of wonder, what is the agenda behind a government that says, yeah, drink all the alcohol you want and kill your brain cells, but you're not allowed to smoke this herb that might actually make you smarter? We're getting into Aldous Huxley, Brave New World territory, where the government intentionally damages the brains of the people to keep them subservient and controllable. Kind of weird thing out there. All righty, now let's see. Used to be an old joke that God made marijuana and man made alcohol. Who are you really going to trust? I used to have somebody all the time talking about when I was drinking scotch, and they'd say, don't you know it kills your brain cells? And my reply was, if you're drinking just the right amount of scotch, only the weak brain cells will die. Now, report coming out of tbyil.com, I'm not sure how that's pronounced, it's an acronym, where now it's shown that NutraSweet, aspartame, is linked to increasing occurrences of leukemia and lymphoma. Now remember, aspartame, before it was approved as an artificial sweetener, was classed as a biological weapon because it can overstimulate neurons to the point where they burn themselves out. They exhaust themselves of neurotransmitters. And then it was approved for use on the American people as an artificial sweetener, despite its neurotoxic effects. Now it's been linked to leukemia and lymphoma. But hey, it makes money, so it's good to sell to the American people. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I want to talk about artificial sweeteners here right now. And I want to preface this news story by going back to the problems with high fructose corn syrup. And it was pitched as it's just another sugar, it's fine, manufacturers love it, it's cheaper than plant sugars from sugarcane or sugar beets. It stores on the store shelf much longer without the sugar settling out, which can be a problem, so they cut losses that way. And a while back, they were mounting this new marketing campaign. They wanted to rename it as simply corn sugar, and their selling point is you can't tell the difference. Now, as I reported here on the show, yeah, I can tell the difference. I have no problem with cane sugar or beet sugar. No problem at all. But when I was back allowing high fructose corn syrup in my diet, I kept getting these hypoglycemic incidents where my body was overproducing insulin. And I almost made the mistake of going over to the doctor and say I may be getting into some form of diabetes here because it was in my family, but I got rid of the high fructose corn syrup, and I'm just fine. So now there's another article coming out. This was reported over in the British media, the Daily Mail, where there are new studies calling into question the safety of Splenda or any of the products containing sucralose, because sucralose, like high fructose corn syrup, increases insulin production, in the case of sucralose, by 20%. Which means people who are eating this product are going to experience hypoglycemic episodes, which are particularly unpleasant to go through. In fact, insulin injection used to be considered a form of mental treatment for psychiatric patients along the same lines as shock treatments, various other forms. Basically, they were torturing people to pretend that they were acting normal here. And the concern here is that regular elevation of insulin levels can lead to insulin resistance, which is the gateway to type 2 diabetes. And so once again, we're seeing these artificially created chemicals that are marketed to us as the next great thing in weight loss and blah, 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 blah. They're dangerous. The attitude of these companies that create these chemicals is, if our lab animals don't die in 30 days, we figure it's safe. And the effects of long-term chronic exposure are not being tested for until it's already out in the general population. And they get 6 to 8 months down the road, and all of a sudden people are falling over dead or they're getting sick, and they say, all right, well, guess we'll pull that one off the market and we'll try a new dandy patentable chemical. And at this point, my attitude is, if you can't pronounce it, you shouldn't put it in your mouth. And I've become a chronic label reader in the store. You know, and if I see a food product that's got all these dihydrophethyl, I'm not going to buy that. And I certainly won't buy anything with monosodium glutamate or high fructose corn syrup. And I want organic and natural, or I am not giving you my hard-earned dollars. And same thing with cosmetics. There's stuff in there that can actually harm you. In fact, Claire and I had a bit of a shock yesterday because we went into the store where Claire gets her moisturizer. And we go to this store because when we first started shopping there, I was reading all the labels on all the boxes, and it was all natural, organic, mineral-based stuff. And we got a bit of a shock yesterday because I was looking at their current offerings, and I started seeing all those bad chemicals that Claire cannot be exposed to. So under the press of economic pressure, this store has abandoned its high ground of having healthier alternative products, and they're back to selling the same chemical goop that any other stores are. So you got to be careful. You got to keep a list of those things you should not have in your body. Got to have, you got to read those labels, and those ingredients labels are tiny, 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 tiny. And so, I have a Swiss Army knife that's got a magnifier on it that I'll use to read that. But they make those lists of ingredients really small because they hope you're not going to read them and see what's on there. All righty, phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. We're in our last half hour of our broadcast today. Interesting story. We're talking about how the new immigration bill is going to bring in all these new 600,000 guest workers from outside the country to help drive down wages and prices. There's a new scandal. Apparently, Michael Sestak, who was in charge of issuing visas at the U.S. consulate in Ho Chi Minh City, has been charged with trading U.S. visas for cash, accepting bribes from hundreds of Vietnamese nationals who wanted to come to the United States of America. And basically said, give me some money, here's your visa, go off, go to Disneyland, have fun. Amazing stuff here. Meanwhile, over in Azerbaijan, the International Bank of Azerbaijan, the country's biggest lender, is raising a $100 million offering in order to start an Islamic-style bank. So they're going to go on Obama's special high-interest targets list. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones. Casey in Florida. Aloha, Casey. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Good afternoon and aloha,
Aloha.
Michael. Hey, listen, I have a question, and I know you're not a spokesman for RBN, but there was a story, and it's still on the top stories, and they rotate through the stories, kind of like a crawl or something. I don't know if you call it that, but it rotates with the top stories, and I'm perplexed by one of the stories that's got on there, and it says, all talk, armed march in Washington, didn't muster enough, and I'll just say cojones. That's not what it said. And it's an article critical of Kokesh, and let me just take one sentence out of this article. Once again, the American people have been defeated and have been made to look like cowards because of activists biting off more than they can chew, end quote. Now, when you scroll down to the bottom of the story, it gives attribution of the story to Adam versus the Man and then IntelHub.com, and I'm just scratching my head trying to figure why that would have been carried unless you were the lone voice on the network against that march in Washington.
Well, you're absolutely right. Outside the scope of this radio show, I'm not a spokesperson for Republic Broadcasting, and I don't know how it got there. It could just be that, somebody wanted to have an alternative point of view there to spark exactly the kind of discussion and debate we're having here right now. My opinion about Kokesh and his planned march has not changed. I know they did have a protest, an open carry protest down in Texas, which is a pretty good safe place to have one of those things. But again, at this point, we dare not give the government any excuse for them to declare a national emergency, suspend the Constitution and the Congress, and bring about this dictatorship that George W. Bush was joking about here. If we just sit quietly and patiently, you can see it everywhere. This system is on the verge of collapse. It's going to come crashing down. And our goal right now is to survive the period of confusion, which we all need to be prepared for, and start thinking seriously. What kind of a nation do we, the American people, want to have here? Come about next. We need to learn from what the Russian republics did right, which was to kick out their money junkies and take control of their central bank. And we always talk about the blueprint for the new America. And going back to much of what's in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, I think is still valid and pertinent today. Some of it we can let go of. We really don't need an electoral college anymore. And we could bring some of that stuff up to date, but we need to go back to that original model of very limited central government, power to the states, power to the people, power to the local community, full enshrinement of our recognized rights, and no private central bank. That's always going to be my top agenda. No private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. We need a public currency that is a public utility.
Thank you. Thanks for your comment. I'll get off here, but I just wanted to say that I felt like it was a situation where, calmer heads prevailed, cooler heads prevailed, and not a lack of cojones. So anyway, it's what's the old saying? They're like noses. Opinions are like noses. Everybody's got one. So thanks a lot.
And we all like to play with them. All righty. Yeah, I see it also as cooler heads prevailing. Obviously, other people have different opinions, and anybody who agrees with me 100% ought to be seeking psychiatric help at this point. We're going to go back to the phones here. Jerry in New Jersey. Aloha, Jerry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You mentioned about before about real estate values actually going up.
Yes.
And the only problem is a lot of people without jobs are not going to be able to qualify for mortgages.
Well, remember we reported earlier in the week where the banks are now loosening up the requirements for a down payment. They're going back into exactly the same real estate behaviors that led to the crash of 2008. They're going to do another bubble. They're going to ride the bubble, make their money, and dump the losses on the American people.
And also another thing is, which even if you do get the house paid off eventually, taxes keep going up. And it's almost like paying. There's places here in New Jersey that there's people probably paying about $5,000 a year in insurance, or not insurance, but I mean taxes and insurance, a combination of bills. You know what I mean? So when you really think about it, it's like, well, even if you do get the house paid off, it's still going to be an expense.
And they can still take it through eminent domain anytime they feel like it. We really don't own our homes. We're simply allowed to pretend to ourselves that we own them in exchange for 30 years of labor whose work product is delivered to government and the bankers. And that is absolutely the reality here. I mean, especially with the government completely ignoring the Bill of Rights. They can come into your home. They can kick down your door. I saw this video the other day about these police officers who were looking for the landlord of a rental unit and forced their way into the tenant's place and just abused her and treated her roughly. The person they were looking for wasn't even there. They didn't have a warrant. And yeah, when the government can come into your home, just on a whim, when they can go into your private computer data as a whim, we've really lost all of our freedoms, because the first and most important freedom is the freedom to say no. And when you are no longer able to say no, you've lost all your freedoms. There is no freedom without the freedom to say no. No, you may not come into my home. I'm not committing a crime, and you can't prove otherwise. No, you may not read my email. No, you may not look at my private computer data. No, you may not steal my business secrets to sell to some political crony.
Exactly. I just wanted to get that point out. That way, I don't want people to get too comfortable thinking that they're going to, have a better future because their house is paid off. Okay. All right, just wanted to bring that point up, man. Thanks.
You got it there. And, of course, these days, under economic pressures on retirees, most people, when their home is paid off or close to paid off, they have to get a reverse mortgage just to pay all their bills and cover the losses in their private retirement accounts that were savaged by the economic downturn. All these people who were on private pensions, where the pensions were defunded by the mortgage-backed security fraud, they're basically having to sell their house back to the bankers just to survive. And it's all geared to maximize profits to Wall Street and dump the losses on you, and that is fascism. Absolutely, that is fascism here. All righty, let's see. Interesting article. This is over at Washington's blog again. The big banks and Commodities Future Trading Commission conspired to hide speculation from the United States Congress. And we're getting to the situation of saying, what's rigged? It's all rigged. It's all rigged. That's all that's holding this illusion of an economy together. Rigging the stock market, rigging the LIBOR, rigging the gold and silver trade. It's all manipulation and rigging, and it's on a scale that just dwarfs what was going on in 1929, leading up to that crash. And when it comes down, it's all going to come down. And all the paper and ink that the Federal Reserve can crank out there isn't going to stop it. Is not going to stop it at all. And it is all being rigged. They're looting you. Day after day after day, they're looting you. And we have a coffee mug we sell in our online store that has the quote on there. The last official act of any government is to loot the nation. We're at that stage. Nobody's thinking long term. Nobody is thinking as if they think the United States is still going to be here in 5 years. Except the politicians who want to run in 2016. The bankers are acting like they expect this thing to fall down any second, and they're grabbing everything they can right now and shoving it in their pockets. All righty. Oh, my goodness here. All righty, let's see what's going on here. This was an interesting story. Apparently, a warehouse used by the Environmental Protection Agency was subject to an audit. And they discovered that using boxes and cartons and crates, the workers had walled off a large section of the warehouse where they had set up what's being called a man cave. Couches, TVs, refrigerators, exercise equipment, just their own little personal space to hang out and relax in. And they're starting to wonder, first of all, you know, the rental is being paid on this space. And what are these workers doing there if they've set up this little relaxation place? Obviously, there isn't enough work to keep all these people employed. And it's just another example of the rampant waste and fraud that goes all the way through the United States federal government. Just amazing here. Mark Faber is over there saying quantitative easing is unlimited, will never end. He's absolutely right about that. They're now trapped into always providing that $80+ billion of instant new money to Wall Street to game the stock market, to game the investments, to keep it going. They can't stop it now. They absolutely cannot stop it right now. Now, Faber goes on to say that the impact is diminishing. I would question that. I would imagine that because of the rampant inflation, every month that additional $85 billion does have a slightly smaller and smaller impact, but I don't think that in and of itself is justification for saying the bad effects are going away. Certainly for the American people who are looking at skyrocketing gas and food prices, the effects of this hyperinflation are felt very, very strongly. The only reason that we're not seeing a greater impact on consumer prices is because the vast majority of this newly created money is going into the pockets of the money junkies and not into general circulation. Probably this is one of the reasons why Goldman Sachs is out there thinking they're doing God's work. We're protecting America from inflation by keeping all this money for ourselves. Is that not a good thing for us to be doing? Blah, 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 blah here. Now, moving on right along here, let's see. Israel has escalated their attacks in Jerusalem during the month of May. We're getting more reports of situations where over in the West Bank, the illegal settlers are setting fire to Palestinian homes and structures, and the fire departments are being blocked from putting the fire out by the Israeli Defense Forces. Now, I want to get back here. I was talking about this last week about the mockumentary that Animal Planet put together about mermaids. And it is a hoax. It's an absolute hoax. And it did give Animal Planet its biggest audience ever. And there are two problems with that. First of all, because the fact that it was a hoax was minimized and in some cases not even reported, this actually convinced a lot of people mermaids are real. And because it was such a huge success, we're going to start seeing more of these. Bigfoot is real. Werewolves are real. Vampires are real. On channels that base their reputation on teaching you something about the world. Animal Planet was supposed to be an educational channel. That mermaid show would have been better suited to the Sci-Fi Channel. And it was a well-produced show, and I enjoyed watching it, even though I knew it was a complete fraud. Sort of Blair Witch project thing here. All right, we got a couple more phone calls here. Hobie up in Oregon. Aloha, Hobie. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I got a notice on the Internet a few weeks back that the Homeland Security had issued a notice to all the banks that they have the authority to go in and open up any safety deposit box that they want to, look into it, and take out anything that they want. Do you have any information on that? Yeah, this has actually been known for quite some time. In the event of an economic crisis where the bank's solvency is on the line, yeah, they've already said that the banks can go into the safety deposit box and seize any assets in there to put on their balance sheets to stay solvent. And we did talk about this a while back. Now, when I still had a bank safety deposit box, all we kept in there were data backups of my wife's music to have some off-site protection, but we don't even do that anymore. We've got other provisions for that. But, yeah, we're hearing about banker haircuts in Cyprus and soon to be in Europe. Your money and your valuables are not safe in the banks because when push comes to shove, they're just going to grab it.
They are just going to grab it. And I wouldn't leave anything of any value in the banks. And our common sense advice right now is you should have no more of your money in the bank than it takes to cover your outstanding obligations, and you should have the rest at home under your own control, part of it in physical silver and physical gold. As long as they're working as hard as they are to keep the prices down, now's the time to be buying in. But you can't trust the banks. The banks are not there to serve the public. They're there to serve themselves.
It's getting scarier every minute.
Yes, it is.
I just wanted some confirmation on it. I thank you for letting me in, and you've confirmed it for me.
Yeah, that actually came out a while back. In the event of a national emergency, if you look at all those FEMA executive orders, the government just has is arrogating to itself all these unconstitutional authorities to just completely direct the country any way they want to go. None of it is constitutional. But the government is getting ready to basically declare war on the 50 states, is really what it comes down to. All right, Michael in North Carolina. Aloha, Michael. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, aloha, Michael. Two quick things. Everyone knows mermaids are real. Come on.
Well, we've been into the Pakalolo today, haven't we?
Get on the program.
Yeah.
And there's a great flying spaghetti monster in the sky.
That's true. Oh, I believe in... I'm a pastafarian. I believe in the flying spaghetti monster.
Another quick thing, if oral sex causes cancer, I'd have died 25 years ago.
Ah, okay. Well, thank you for elucidating us on that.
Second Amendment. I got pulled over last night, and not last night, but the night before. I got pulled over, and I carry because I get out of work at 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And encountered an officer, got out, cleared my weapon, did all the things, put my hands on the steering wheel, told him I had a weapon, and got out, and he wanted to get my weapon out of the car, and I told him, no, I'll get the bag out of the car, and then you can take the weapon and check it and clear it. So he gets the weapon out of the bag, and he checks it, and he clears it, and he checks my permit, and, everything's up to date. And he goes, well, do you mind if I look around the car? And I said, no, absolutely not. He goes, well, what do you got to hide? I said, why don't you just call your supervisor right now? Because I'm not going to let you search my car. If you want to call your supervisor, that's fine, but you're not going to get in my car. So the supervisor comes along, finally, after about 20 minutes. They put my weapon on my vehicle and said, I said, am I being detained? Am I free to go? Which is two questions you should ask. So he said, you're not being detained. You're free to go. I said, all right, cool. So I grabbed my weapon. I saw the magazine in the chamber, and I chamber around. And the supervisor turns around with his hand on his gun, and he says, what are you doing? I said, well, under state law, I can return my weapon to its original position. So the really quick version is they said, no. And the supervisor said, put your hands back on the car. You're under arrest.
Okay, we got to take Michael, we got to take a commercial break. Do not go away. I want you to come back to this story after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Michael in North Carolina. And, Michael, you left off at the point where the police told you were under arrest.
Yeah, because I had returned my weapon to the original state, I would obviously disturb them, but it's law. That's what I can do. And I knew that. I got put over the hood, and my weapon was taken again. And finally, I had to explain to the sergeant, I'm like, listen, this is North Carolina state law. If you want to call somebody who knows the law, I'm telling you it's the law. I've read the law. I know the law because I'm a responsible gun owner. But so whatever you got to do, just go ahead and do it. And he did. And the lieutenant came on the scene. When the lieutenant got there, I talked to the lieutenant, and I said, listen, I know the law, and I was correct in what I did. And these guys just got kind of a little bit overzealous, and they wanted to search my car, and I told them they couldn't, and that pissed the first officer off. I said, I'm within the law. Can you just let me go? And the lieutenant actually did, in the end, say, I asked him the same question. Are you detaining me, or am I free to go? And he said, no, you're free to go. I said, well, thank you for that hour of my life.
Okay, well, I'm glad it had a happy ending here. I thought we were going to come back from the commercial break and you were calling me from the city jail or something. on a practical note, had I been in your situation, I probably would have driven a quarter mile down the road away from the police before I started loading the gun again, because right now the police, they view all Americans as a potential threat. They're being trained that way. We have all these Israeli companies coming over and training American police forces to view everybody as a dangerous suspect. We know that a bunch of these police are on SSRIs, which is clouding their mind. They're looking for reasons to cause trouble for Americans because they can't actually catch the real criminals. They don't actually thwart real crimes. They have to sort of create a problem so they can act like they're providing a community service by reacting to these situations. And we've seen all these, like we reported earlier, the police tased this man, was trying to save his 8-year-old son from a fire, and the kid wound up dying in the fire. So the police are out of control. 10% of them are on SSRIs at least. And so on a practical level, I probably would have driven down the road a little bit before reloading and rechambering my gun. But I'm glad that it did come out, and it is so important to understand the law, because the reality is the police themselves don't really know the laws.
No, they really don't.
They really don't. They're there to basically keep people in their places, to protect the banks and the bankers. It's become so obvious. Here on the island of Oahu, the police are shutting down regular standalone police stations, and they're taking space in the shopping malls. So they're right there ready to hassle shoplifters and thieves and stuff. And when you have the taxpayer-funded police departments in the shopping malls, you know what they're there really to protect, and it's not the interests of the people. They're there to protect the money. Protect the money at all costs.
Hopefully they don't take quarter in your house.
Well, effectively with all the spying they already have. And on that note, there's the magic music. It's time for us to get the heck out of here, get some things done with the afternoon. Thank you for the phone call, Michael.
Okay.
We're going to head on out of here. Please remember, Republic Broadcasting is in the middle of a fundraising campaign, the 1,000 Ounce of Silver campaign. We need your help to get the message out to all those Americans who are starting to ask the important questions. We don't get money from corporations. We don't get grants from non-governmental organizations. We rely on you, our audience, to keep us here, keep us going, getting the truth out. So have a good afternoon, good evening wherever you are, and aloha, America.